We're on Daf Tzadi Zayin Amid Beis. Okay. Now, technically, we got up to the word lo, but kind of in the middle of a sentence. So let's start with Tnan. Okay. Now, who can help me count up the lines? I don't know which way we want to count it. Oh, you know what? I think the best way is you see Gemara, right? The big Gimel Mem. Mm-hmm. So drop down 1, 2, 3 lines, 7 lines. You see that? The first word in the line is ger. Mm-hmm. And you move your finger to the left and you'll get to Tnan. Okay then? Tnan, Hagiores, Shenis Gairu, Bonea, Ima, this is our Mishnah, Lo Cholzin, Velo Miyapin. Just 1 second. So my timer, why is there no Yibum here in this case? Lav Mishum Das Siri. Right, these two brothers, if one of the brothers marries the wife of his late brother, then we have to assume that there's some sort of an Iser D'Rabbanan. What is the Iser D'Rabbanan? That the spectator makes the mistaken jump and comes to the wrong conclusion that a brother is allowed to marry his brother's wife. And there's no Iser Eishes Ach. Now, this is a case of Achim min ha'em, correct? Because she came to be Megayer her 2 sons. And the Mishnah is telling us that even though on a Doraisa level, Ger, Shenis Ger, Kukot, Shenola, there's no Achva min ha'em in this case, because each one of these 2 brothers had his own personal gerus, but nevertheless, we have to worry about the repercussions here, the spin-off, if the onlooker mistakenly concludes that they are ach. And the erva, we mentioned this a few times already, that the erva of Eishes ach applies even to achim min ha'em, in a case of Jews, a regular doraisa of erva. Okay, so this is the Chiddush of our Mishnah, that in the case of Gerim, each one of these Gerim, because they come from the same mother, is enjoined from marrying his brother, quote unquote, brother's wife. Okay, now we said until now that in the case of Achim min ha'em, 1 second, if it's only Achim min ha'em, right, is Kuliava lo pligi das sire. Do you remember that? In other words, we were talking about a machlokus between Rav Acha bar Yaakov and Rav Sheshes in a case where they were both Achim min ha'av and Achim min ha'em. But in a case of Achim min ha'em, is everybody agrees that's Siri. Now, in the note here, that's where I got stuck yesterday. He quotes the Tefer Shmuel, that was the name of the Achron. He says that this is a kasha. Why is this a kasha? That I couldn't figure out. I mean, l'chora, he's right. It sounds like a kasha, but why would this be a kasha unless we're talking about a case of not only achim min ha'em, but also achim min ha'av. So what was the case of achim min ha'av? Let's just go back to that for a second. It's achim min ha'av. Is kuliyamalo pligi So we spoke about promiscuity, right? Do you remember that? And we said that in the eyes of the public, that they're not brothers. They're not brothers at all. There was too much, free hanky panky going. So no one's going to say when they see one brother marrying the other brother, meaning the other brother's wife, that it is a heterosexual, because they're going to come to the conclusion that they're not really brothers. But in the case of a mother, where it's clear-cut evidence that they are brothers sharing the same mother, we have to institute an isur of Eishes Ach. So our Mishnah L'chora would support that. I don't. Why is our Mishnah? The Mishnah says, "Hagyorish is Gaira Boneh Imo Lo Cholzin Below Miyam." I understand to mean that there's an isur here, and the language of the Gemara is what? My time alav mishum da'asiri. Da'asiri. He writes in the footnote da'asiri mi yibum pturim heim shekein yibum noag rak bi'achim min ha'av ve'ilu af she'en gam b'nei av echad ein nechshav b'nei aviyah kefi she's parish b'mishnah. But now the Gemara is saying Asiri. Asiri means he doesn't even have the option of marrying his brother's wife. Why is that a kasha? I mean, to me, in my mind, this would be a proof, not a question, but a proof. Does the art scroll say anything on this? Somehow the Masechet is not doing it. That's probably not a psul of the Masechet. It's probably my problem, but it's not sinking in. David, you have the art scroll there?
Yeah, it says like Chalti Lo Yad, and I can't be Chalitza. Because it got thank Father, my time, and what's the reason?
Wait, what does the art scroll say on the words Lo Miyab? Does he add anything to that?
They perform neither Chalitza nor Yibum, even though they share the same father.
Can you read it one more time? I'm sorry. I'm not used to the accent.
They perform neither Chalitza nor Yibum.
They perform neither. But he doesn't use the word Asiri.
Sorry?
He doesn't say that they're not allowed to. He says they do not perform.
They don't perform Chalitza or Yibum, even though they share the same father. Then he says,
even though they share the same father. Whoa. So that's the opposite of what I have in the Masechet. 1 second. He says, Mishum Shem Achim Min Ha'en. You have that, John, in your. But he's saying that they share the same father.
No, they share the same father.
Wow, I don't know. There may be a machlokes between the Masechet and the art school. I don't know. Go on. Let's read weiter.
It says my time. So why does Mishnah say that the widow and the remaining brother may not perform Yibum? Is it not because they are forbidden to marry each other?
That's it? No footnotes?
No, this contradicts the opinion of Rebbe Yaakov, upon whom such a marriage is permissible.
Because what? Because they're achim in ha'av. Is that what I'm saying?
Yeah, even though they share the same father.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. If this is a kasha on Rav Acha, then it has to be that they're achim in ha'av. So the Masechet is throwing me off, because the Masechet writes they're achim in ha'ein, which everybody agrees in that case that if they're achim in ha'ein, there's an isa. So why would the Mishnah is just supporting what we know? If it's a kasha on Rav Acha bar Yaakov, it must be that they're achim in ha'av. Now, what is achim in ha'av? Which is I'm not sure exactly what achim in ha'av means. Somehow, I guess they were living as husband and wife together. I mean, they're not doing. That's why I asked you yesterday that we're not doing. What do you call it? What are those tests? DNA testing. But I guess they were living together as husband and wife, right? And the premise is that they're achim in ha'av. I guess that's. I wish I had a more profound grasp on what makes them achim in ha'av, because
No, we are assuming that that's the
Yeah, because they're living together as husband and wife. I guess it's just an assumption on them. And therefore, Rav Acha would say, in this case, there's no Isser Veishis Av, even in Rabbanon, because they're Achim in Av, which we interpreted to mean that nobody believes that they're Achim in Av. Well, he's learning this. I'll read it to you. He says they're Achim in Aim. I didn't invent it. The Asiri Losses is Eishus Achev Mishum Shem Achim in Aim. Why is that a kasha on anybody? It just confirms everything that we said. Maybe it means Mishum Shem Af Achim in Aim. In addition to being Achim in Av, they're Achim in Aim. I don't know, but that's not what it says over here. But David, one more question for you. In the article, does he mention the word prohibited at any point?
It says in the note. It says in the note that the Gemara at this point assumes that when the Mishnah says they do not perform Yibum, it means not merely that there is no mitzvah for them to perform Yibum, but forbidden to know.
Excellent. Okay, that makes me happy. Okay. Because that means I'm not totally off base. So it's not just that they're not required to the obligated to the mitzvah, but they're prohibited from having this relationship. Why? Because we're going to be afraid that the onlooker is going to think that he's marrying Eishis Av. The only piece of the puzzle I don't cut is why and how does the Gemara assume that they're Achim and Av? All it says in the Mishnah is Giorish and Iskairu B'nei Ima. But I guess he's assuming that they're living together as husband and wife. Therefore, the premise is that he's the father.
Yeah, but I thought you commented yesterday that the mother and the two sons converted, that they were born as non-Jews, and that there was assumption that non-Jewish women were licentious.
Right.
So, hey, same father, you have a question, that's the same mother. There's an issue whether there's the same father. I mean, the woman would have been considered as a non-Jew before conversion. Children were conceived, born. She was a non-Jew.
Right. No, at the end of the day, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says that this, since we really don't know who the father is, therefore there's no prohibition. But the Mishnah is saying just the opposite. The Mishnah is saying that since we have a premise that they come from the same father, therefore we have to prohibit this kind of a marriage because it looks like he's marrying the wife of his brother. Whereas Rav Acha Bar Yaakov is saying, no, out there in the olam, they know that not they know, but they wonder whether or not they're brothers. And since they wonder whether or not they're brothers, there's no issur to marry. But the Mishnah says that not just saying miyabim that they're parted from Yibum, but the Mishnah means they're not allowed to perform. That's against Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. So let's go on in the Gemara. Lo. The Eina b'Toras chalitza v'sharia li'alma. Inu nami shor. I don't know why he has to add the words sharia li'alma. That I don't understand. I guess he's saying that since there's no Torah Yibum, there's no Zika, there's no Yivam L'Shuk, and even Midrabanan, she doesn't need Yibum Achalitza. But the main point, the punchline for our purposes, the Inu Nami Shari. See, I think the Gemara is adding here Sharia Li'alma for the following reason. Why would the Mishnah have to tell me Eina b'Toras chalitza v'yibum? Who had a havamina that two gerim are considered brothers, and there would be chalitza of this one's wife, and so forth. So he adds another point that to such an extent there's no yibum that she doesn't even need chalitza, v'sharia li'alma. She can just get married to anybody. Not even the Rabbanon is there a like a reach of Yibum, a reach of sleep. But the Mishnah is only focused exclusively on the mitzvah of Yibum. To tell me that there's no mitzvah of Yibum, they had two Gerim, they're not related to each other. And there's no Yibum. He decides he wants to marry her because he likes her. He's allowed to do so. Because that's Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. But in this very case, Rav Sheshet is asking that he's not allowed to marry. And he would interpret the Mishnah that it's not just Eina B'Torah Sibum B'Chalitza, but that there's an Isser for him to marry her because it looks like he's marrying Eishes Ach. And he's not willing to accept that the word out there in the street is that because of this licentiousness, therefore they're not really brothers from the same. See, where I asked for Tani, at the end of the Mishnah it says Afilu. So here he fills in some words. Okay, I'm going to read it with his filling. He says Afilu hora aso shel rishon shel lo b'kedusha v'leidaso b'kedusha v'asheni hora aso v'leidaso b'kedusha is nevertheless lacholtzim lo b'yavmin. So we're going to focus now on the word Afilu. What is the significance of the word Afilu? Afilu always means that I'm going to give you even a greater chiddush, even in this case. Meaning, even though this one was Horaso Shelo B'Kedusha, and this one was Horaso B'Kedusha, is nevertheless, there's no p'tur of Chalitza and Yibum. That doesn't make any sense. It should have been, even though they both had a Leder B'Kedusha, there's no Yibum. Because Kekatan Chinolan. What does it mean? Even if there was a difference in the Hora, one has a Hora Shelo B'Kedusha, the other one has a Hora B'Kedusha, even so there's no Yibum. On the contrary, I mean, even though they both had a Leder B'Kedusha, there's no Yibum. If you're going to say Asiri, this is Rav Sheshes, I guess. So according to Rav Sheshes, we can understand the word Afilu. So again, Iyamrit Bishlema, if we're going to hold like Rav Sheshes, and that means Asiri, Rav Sheshes was the one who paskin that you can't marry your brother's wife in the case of Gerim. And what does it mean, Lo Choltzim Lo Miyavim, according to Rav Sheshes? It means that there's an Iser to be Miyavim her. Hainu Diktoni Afil. Now we can justify the word Afil. The Afagav the Rishon Ora Asa Shelo B'Kedusha. Leidasa B'Kedusha V'Asheni Ora Asa V'Leidasa B'Kedusha. Ukishtei Imos Dami. Oh my gosh. Ukishtei Imos Dami. Throw me a life buoy here. I'm drowning here. Kishtei Imos Dami. Go figure that out. He says, Kibonim shel shtei imos. This is wild. I mean, she gave birth to two boys. Why is that shtei imos? The answer is because the pregnancy took place, one before Hagerus and the other after Hagerus. Did I get that right? Just the Mitzias. I'm not explaining the wonders. Just the Mitzias. So even in this case, they don't look like brothers. They look like they have two different mothers. Why? Because since one was an embryo before Hagerus and the other was after Hagerus, it looks like they're not brothers at all. And they're coming from two different mothers. I have a feeling this is not a psychological statement. we're talking about a halachic statement, meaning that according to Jewish law, she's a new person. There's two different imams, two different mothers. There was Mary, and now there's Leah. You know what I'm saying? And Mary and Leah, although physically they're the same person, they're two different people. That's Kishtei imams. He says, Heyos, the Ein Hora Osam Shala Achim Shave, Einom Nirim Ki Achim. That's what it means by Shtei imos. They don't look like brothers. Umikeven Shekain, Vayomakom Lomar, Shemutal Kol Echad Losei says Eishes Achim. And the Mishnah is coming to teach us afilu hachi with the afilu. Let's underline the word afilu. Asiri. He cannot marry Eishes Achi because in truth they are ach. They are ach. Again, we're defending Rav Sheshes now. Again, according to Rav Sheshes, we understand the word afilu because it looks like shtei mos. Nevertheless, the Torah, the Mishnah is asking that they can't marry the sister-in-law, even though it seems like they are not even brothers at all, because one was Horaso Shalom B'Kedusha, the other was Horaso B'Kedusha. Ela Iyamrit. But if we go like Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, sorry, it means that according to Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, because they are Achim min Ha'av, I guess, and the people, like we said, don't interpret it as Achim, if he can marry his sister-in-law. So when the Mishnah says Lo Choltzin Lo Miyabim, all it means is that there's no need for Yibum or Chalitza. But he can marry his sister-in-law. Is my afilu? What does the word afilu mean in this Mishnah? In the case of Oraso Shalom B'Kedusha, and the other one was Oraso B'Kedusha. Why is the header of an Ichel Ashut? We're just telling him that there's no Yibum or Chalitz. What are you telling me that what? That it's Nirim Kishtei Imos. Why would that have any impact on the law of Yibum? According to Rav Acha, the Mishnah is totally exclusively focused on Yibum. We're not talking about whether you can marry her, because in fact, according to Rav Acha, he's allowed to marry. And there's no Isur of Eishasah. And if you're in the context of Yibum, then why would there be a Havamina that because this one was Hora'aso Shalom and this one was Hora'aso B'Kedusha, there wouldn't be Yibum? That's counterintuitive. I mean, if you're separating them, according to Rav Sheshes, by separating them, you really lead me into a trap, and you're attracting me to the position that there should be a hetero, because by separating them, because one had Horaso Shalom Kedusha, the other Horaso Kedusha, now I understand that you are tempting me to think that in this case there certainly should be a heter for him to marry. And the Mishnah wants to say, Lo Miyabim means that you're not allowed to marry. That's the afilu. But according to Rav Sheshes, according to Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, that the whole Mishnah from beginning to end is focused exclusively on the question of Yibum. What are you telling me that because they're so separated one from the other, therefore there's no Yibum? Even in the case where they're so separated, and one had a Horah B'Kedusha, the other had a Horah Shalom B'Kedusha. Even in that case, it's no Yibum. Adarabah, it's more of a reason to say that there is no Yibum.
Yeah, that's why I think it has to be mother wasn't.
Steve, I don't know what you're batting about.
Because
Well, what tree are you trying to climb over? You're just making life miserable.
But you can't talk about
Yeah, I'm trying to understand the Gemara.
You can't talk about evil if the father wasn't Jewish. It doesn't exist. So the only way I can interpret this case is there's a Jewish father and not Jewish mother.
Wait a second, Steve. The Gemara is saying that from the context of Yehu, there is no chiddush in the Mishnah. Well, you should be applauding the Gemara. You should be very happy with this Gemara. The Gemara is saying that the more we get into this whole Yibum issue, the more we're absolutely convinced that there's not even a Havamina to say there would be Yibum. So what's the word afilu? But according to Rav Shei says, it makes a lot more sense because the Mishnah is not limited, in this pit of Yibum. We're not talking about Yibum. We want to know whether there's any Sach or not. So afilu, even in a case where they're so separated from each other, one brother was born, was conceived before the Gerus, and the other after the Gerus. Even in that case, we have an Isser of Eishes Ah. But if you're going to go with Rav Acha's interpretation of the Mishnah is totally focused on Yibum. What's the Havamina that it could be Yibum over here? That you have to tell me, Afilu, even in this case where he was conceived before the Gerus, and he was conceived after, there's no Yibum. Well, what do I need that for? So I think, Steve, if you're telling me that that there's no Yibum, you're supporting the Gemara's casualty. What I think the Gemara is going to try to prove here is that maybe there is a chiddush. Now, I don't know what the Gemara is going to say. Let's read the Gemara just to get the answer. So we have it. He said, what? You making fun of me?
No.
He says, Efshal levayer es loshen haGemara et loshen haMishnah afilu shebesifra. Even according to Rav Acha bar Yaakov, who says you're allowed to marry, in 2 Gerim, you're allowed to marry. It's Afal Gavdi Travayu Leidosan Bikdusha. So now he's fast forwarding from Horah to Leda. Forget about Horah. Let's focus on the Leda. That's the Chiddush of the Mishnah. Yeah, but why did the Mishnah have to add? All right, that I don't know. Anyway, so the Gemara is saying that if we focus totally on the Leda, and they both were born after the Gerus, and they really look like 2 brothers. And therefore, Yossi Lechlufi V'Yisrael Afilu Hachishara. That's a Gavaldig Chiddush to the Mishnah because they both shared the same labor situation after the Gerus. But why is the Mishnah confusing me with Horaso this and Horaso that? One second. If the Gerus wait a minute. What's the deal if the Gerus took place before the Horah? Then this, right? So wait a minute. We have to worry about the father from Yibum. But let's wait a minute. Let's leave out Yibum for a minute. Let's just talk about Achim and A'im. If the Gerus had taken place before Horah of both of the brothers, then these boys are born Jewish. Their Horah was Biktusha. Their Leda was Biktusha. Their Achim min A'im. And that's enough to generate an Easter Erev of Eichasah. So now the Mishnah is looking for the case where they're not Achim according to the Torah law, but they're as close as possible to be considered Achim, to understand and address the issue of whether midrabanan we should create an Easter of Eichasah. So what would be the most extreme case that's proximate to the case where they were both Horaso and Leidosim, where the Gerus took place before the whole story started? That would be a case where 3 out of 4 variables could be checked off. Let's call him Shimon. Okay, I'll just make up a name. He had a Goyish name, now he has a Jewish name, Shimon, right? So Shimon, he's let's say the younger brother. He had Horaso V'Leidaso B'Kedusha. His brother Reuven, the older brother, had Leidaso B'Kedusha. So we have 3 out of 4 boxes checked off. The only box that's not checked off is Horas Reuven, which was not B'Kedusha. So the Mishnah wants to tell me, the great Chiddush, that even though this case really smells, it has a shmek of Ashes of 2 Achim. Again, I'm going according to Rav Acha now. Nevertheless, there's no Isur of Ashes Ach. Why? Because the first brother was Horaso Shalo B'Kedusha. Any comments? I think I cracked at least one nugget. I don't know if I cracked the whole sugya open, but at least one little piece of the sugya fits into place. So again, we're talking about the Isur Eishes Ach on a Drabanan level, and we're looking for a scenario where it's that much closer to being Shnei Ach. Had there been a Rasa V'Leidaso B'Kedusha, and the Geras took place before the making of me. I don't know if you remember this. If you've ever been to Orlando, I don't know today, but I was there 20 years ago. You remember in Epcot Center? They still have Epcot Center? Okay, so so there used to be in Epcot Center a movie called The Making of Me, where they teach young children about the birds and the bees. They have this whole video, the sperm is going up to this, what I'm talking about? Yeah. So if the Geras took place before the making of us, in this case, the 2 brothers, then they're Achim and A'im, and there's an Isur Eishes Ach. The Mishnah now is, according to Rav Acha, is looking for a case that's as close as possible to being Eishes Achiv and Achim and A'im, and yet it's Mut. Why? Because Horaso of the first of the brothers, Shelo B'Kedusha. Now you can always ask me why. Why Horaso Shelo B'Kedusha should be enough. But that's where this is the part of the sugya I'm not comfortable with, because the Gemara says Ki pligi be mina avu mina ein. To understand and appreciate Rav Acha's kula, we have to introduce the av, because again, if it was mina aim and lo mina av, the Gemara says kuliyava lo pligi, that it's us. And the matir, the leg on which Rav Acha is standing to be matir eishes av on a drabanan level, is the fact that they're also mina av. And in Achim in Av, Kuliyavalo plead the short because of that whole hanky-panky business. Just 1 second. So in the case of Raso Kedusha, in that case, it's very close to being Achim in A'im, but it's not Achim in A'im. But it's also at the same time, and this where we have a paradox of matir as far as the Darabanan of Eishes Ach of Mina Av. It's also Mina Av. As we said, there was a chazaka that they were living together, and people will assume that they're 2 different mothers here, and 2 different fathers, whatever it might be. So that's not too bad. We're not doing terrible. Okay, then. So this is where we'll stop, and we're up to Ika di Am. And we'll pick up on Yom Rishon. Okay, then. Where is it in the Gemara? Ika di Amri. There it is. About 8 lines up from the bottom. Okay, then. So everyone should have a great Shabbos. Parshas